Over on Jaguar Gator 8, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about one of the craziest and stupidest game plans in the history of the Rose Bowl that somehow worked out. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. Also, join me tomorrow night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play NFL Trivia for a chance to win cash prizes. Link to play below. And now, on with our feature presentation. When a league goes on strike, there are no winners. When there is a work stoppage, there are a lot of people upset. The players are upset because they're not getting paid. The owners are upset because they're losing tons of revenue. The coaches are upset because any momentum that they had prior to the stoppage is completely shot, and because it's going to take some time after the work stoppage to get the players back into working condition. The fans are upset because there are no games taking place, and because in their minds, whether it's justified or not, millionaires are arguing with billionaires. The TV networks are upset because they have no games to show and their ratings are going to tank. The advertisers are upset because they're not getting the exposure that they thought they would be getting. Basically, everyone is upset in some regard. That raises the question, who was the most upset about the 1987 strike? Oddly enough, it was someone that had nothing to do with the NFL at all, because the player most upset with the strike was, amazingly enough, a baseball player. When the players went on strike and scab games were played, one man was so upset that, in essence, he threatened to kill the scabs, or at the very least, severely injure them. And what followed was a bizarre controversy where one member of the St. Louis Cardinals was feuding with one member of the other St. Louis Cardinals. Yeah, this one's going to be a bit complicated since we're dealing with two teams with the exact same name, but we're going to get through it. This is the story behind the bizarre controversy and drama between the two Cardinals teams. Before I talk about the controversy and what led to the bizarre feud between one of the players on the baseball team and the entire football team, we need some context to understand the baseball player in question, and the struggles he was going through, as well as how his team was doing. In 1987, the St. Louis Cardinals were one of the best teams in all of baseball. At the All-Star break, it seemed like there was no team in the league better than the Cards. They had a 56-30 record, with their winning percentage of over 65% being the top total in baseball. They led all of baseball with 486 runs scored, and they were a whopping 9 games up on the Montreal Expos for first place in the NL East. This was back when only each division winner made it to the playoffs, so there was no wild card. And the Cards looked like they were running away with it in their quest to win their third division title and make it to their third World Series in the last 6 years. And while there were a lot of reasons for the success of the Cardinals, from an MVP quality season from shortstop Ozzie Smith where he hit over 300 and put up arguably the best numbers of his illustrious Hall of Fame career, to an all-star caliber season from outfielder Willis McGee where he finished the year with a career-high 105 runs batted in, perhaps no player is more instrumental and more influential than the man you've been watching all this time. This is Jack Clark, and in 1987, with the exception of Andre Dawson on the Chicago Cubs, you could make a legitimate argument that he was the best hitter in the National League. He was a force to be reckoned with at first base, and was probably the best player on that entire team. For the 4th time in his career, and for the 2nd time in his last 3 years with the Cards, he was named an All-Star. He finished the season with a career-high 35 home runs, which was the 6th most of any player in the National League. He had a career-high 106 runs batted in, which was the 4th most in the National League. He had a career-high 136 walks, which not only led the National League, but led all of Major League Baseball, as only one other player even walked more than 120 times. On top of all of that, he led the NL with an on-base percentage of .459, led the NL with a slugging percentage of .597, and led the NL with an OPS of 1.055. For those who aren't baseball fans, these are just fancy ways of saying that Clark was really good and was a really efficient hitter, and there's no way that the Cardinals would have been in the position to win the NL East to compete for the World Series without him. However, when you have a 162-game season, it's very easy for something at some point to go wrong. And for Jack Clark, things went wrong at the worst possible time. The bad news for the Cardinals was that over the second half of the season, they completely collapsed. What seemed like a surefire thing to win the division title, especially after leading by 10 games at one point in the season in the middle of July, was quickly becoming a nail-biting finish, as the Cards only played barely above .500 ball over the second half of the season, and even allowed more runs than they scored in that time frame. Things got so bleak at one point that with just 2 weeks to go in the season, the Cards were now only up by a game and a half on the New York Mets and 2 games on the Montreal Expos, and still had to play 3 games against each of those 2 teams. This race was... But at least the Cards had Jack Clark, right? Nope. Because with 1 week left in the regular season, on September 9th, in a game against the Montreal Expos, he sprained his ankle pretty badly, which was later revealed to be torn tendons in his right ankle. Clark was trying to avoid being tagged by first baseman Andres Galarraga, and in the process, fell down and suffered a pretty nasty injury. It was so bad that even though he tried to play on it at one point in a game against the Chicago Cubs, he fell to the ground after swinging and removed himself from the game. As Clark said on how serious his injury was, "I have a tear that is dangerous to a certain point. I can't run at all. Swinging is difficult for me. I have a hard time hitting. I don't have a first step." Other than that, he was feeling perfectly fine and was good to go. And as you could probably expect, Clark was dying to get back there. His team was in the middle of a playoff push, and he wanted to be back not just for the final weekend of the regular season, but for the playoffs, since the Cards had bounced back and wound up clinching the NL East title after that minor scare in the second half of the season. Clark was in the dugout for every game, even when he was hurt, because he was itching to be on the field and around the guys. As Clark bluntly said, "I want to be out there. It's more frustrating for me than them. If I was able to play, I'd play. This is too much fun, and I'm missing it." So after a pretty nasty injury, how are you able to get back into baseball shape? One way is to take batting practice and get in as many reps and swings as possible. The only problem? Clark could not do that the way that he wanted to. And the reason for it was because of the other team in the stadium. Remember that this is the 1980s that we're talking about. Today, there are no NFL teams that share a stadium with the team in Major League Baseball, as after the Oakland Raiders moved to Las Vegas after the 2019 season, that problem was eradicated. As a side note, I talked about the bizarre conflicts that can be involved in sharing a stadium with another team, particularly when it comes to the Oakland Athletics. So if you want to learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. However, back in the 1980s, the cookie-cutter stadium model, where NFL teams and MLB teams would share the same venue, was all too common, to the point where literally the entire AFC Central was comprised of shared venues. And with Busch Stadium, it was no exception, as the St. Louis Baseball Cardinals share the stadium with the St. Louis Football Cardinals. It's Wednesday, September 30th, and the Football Cardinals are practicing at the stadium for their big game against Washington in a few days on October 4th. The strike was going on, so these were scab players trying to gel and learn the playbook. They needed all the time and all the coaching that they could get, especially since a lot of them were not exactly in the best physical condition. But in the eyes of Jack Clark, these weren't the actual Football Cardinals practicing. They were a bunch of phonies. They were replacement players who weren't going to be there the moment the two sides worked out a deal. And odds are, a lot of them would never even play football again. Here he is, trying to rehab and get ready for a playoff run, and he can't do that the way that he wanted to and take some extra batting practice because a football team made up of a bunch of fake players is using the field. And to say that Clark was furious about this would be an understatement. In fact, judging by what he said, he might have legitimately been the person most upset by the replacement players in the scab games. Because when Clark spoke to reporters later in the day, who were there because the baseball Cardinals were taking on the Expos later that night, he unloaded. He said on the football team working out, "That's the worst I've ever seen. Here we're trying to win a pennant. We've got 4 days left in the regular season, and the you-can-fill-in-the-blank scabs are on the field taking up our time." Unbelievable. Now, if that was all that he said, that'd be one thing. He's just angry at the entire situation, and even though he doesn't value the scabs, there's nothing really here that's offensive or makes your jaw drop. Oh, but don't worry. It gets worse. Let's just say Clark did not stop. Just like the Energizer Bunny, he kept going. Because after criticizing the scabs for having the audacity to practice for their game, he issued a warning for the scabs prior to Thursday's series finale against the Expos. If they're still practicing when he steps on the field, watch out. As he said, "If they're there, I'm gonna hit line drives at their butts and see if they catch them. They ought to send those scabs back to Yugoslavia or wherever they came from." I mean, holy cow! There's a lot to unpack here. From the fact that hitting line drives at 100 miles an hour people who are not expecting it to come their way can literally kill them, to the offensive remarks he made about the players and their country of origin, to the confusing belief that he had that the majority of the scabs were coming from Yugoslavia, since of the roughly 1,200 scab players in the league, a grand total of, let me check my notes here, none of them came from Yugoslavia. There weren't even any players in the NFL, on strike or not, from Yugoslavia. And in the near 70-year history of the league, just 5 players hailed from there at the time. Basically, you pick what part of Clark's comment was the worst. But in a matter of about 5 seconds, we went from, "I'm angry that the players are on the field," to, "I'm going to attempt to kill them and send them back where they came from." Naturally, Football Cardinals head coach Gene Stallings was livid about these comments, and understandably thought that Clark was way out of line for these remarks. For one, the Football Cardinals and Baseball Cardinals made an agreement on how long they could practice, and Stallings agreed that his team would leave the field by 4:15. As Stallings said, "We were actually off of it 5 minutes early." Not only was Stallings and his team complying with the pre-existing agreement, but he actually went the extra mile by giving more time. And baseball Cardinals manager Whitey Herzog had no problem with this agreement, which led Stallings to lash out even more at Clark, saying, "I feel sorry for Jack Clark because he's put his manager in an embarrassing situation. I think that's sad. I talked to Whitey about what time we had to be off the field, and neither one of us had a problem." But Stallings was not done there, because he kept going at Clark for those awful comments, especially since his team needed all the time it could get to practice. As Stallings continued, "Sometimes it's hard to figure out people. We've got 8 days to get a whole football team ready to play a game. As strange as it may sound to Jack Clark and some of those people, I'm really trying to win this game. I can understand his frustrations of being injured and needing some practice. I don't understand the remarks he made in regards to this team." Now, not only did Stallings and the football Cardinals need to deal with getting the scabs ready, and not only did he have to worry about the team he actually had and was going to have when the strike ended, but he had to worry about a player on a completely different team in a completely different sport. This feud got incredibly ugly. As for who won in the end, well, this was one of those situations where it's hard to say that anyone truly came out on top. Let's start with Jack Clark. He did not recover like he hoped he would have. While he was able to play in the National League Championship Series against the San Francisco Giants, he didn't start any games, and made just one pinch-hitting appearance. And even though the Cardinals advanced to the World Series for the third time in 6 years after beating the Giants in 7 games, Clark was not on the roster for it, as his injury was so bad that Herzog removed him from the roster to bring on Terry Pendleton. It was an anticlimactic end to an otherwise fantastic 3 years for Clark in St. Louis. He spent the 1988 season with the New York Yankees, and then bounced around the league with the San Diego Padres and Boston Red Sox before never playing in the majors again after the 1992 season. As for the football Cardinals, the good news was that they never had to deal with the issue of scheduling conflicts with the baseball team at Busch Stadium after this. The reason why? Well, the 1987 season was their last one in St. Louis, as they packed their bags and moved to the desert, moving to Tempe for the 1988 season. Yes, I know they were the Phoenix Cardinals, but they played at Sun Devil Stadium. I refuse to acknowledge that Tempe and Phoenix are the same city. And the practice didn't help a lot, as the Cardinals lost 28-21 to Washington. They went 1-2 in the scab games, and finished the season below 500 with a 7-8 record. As a side note, to learn more about that 1987 Cardinals team and a crazy game they had before the strike, click the card in the upper right corner. Everything about this situation was weird. The football Cardinals were actually playing by the rules, but because a player on the baseball Cardinals didn't think that they were actually players and were making a mockery of the sport while his team was in the middle of a pennant race, he trashed them, threatened to kill them, and wanted them deported. It's incredibly bizarre how the last memory that some people have of Jack Clark isn't his MVP caliber season or all the home runs he hit, but rather the fact that he threatened an opposing team in a completely different sport with violence. When I say that there are no winners during a work stoppage, I truly mean it. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. If you want to see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.